Hi, this is Cindy Rogers-Knuckles, and today I'm going to show you how to use my new action set artistic photo masks. I'm really excited about these actions. I wanted to create something that would make creating my art journal pages easier and more artsy looking, but of course you can use them on any style or themed layout that you want, or project even. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to mention. First of all, these have been tested and run in Photoshop Elements 11, so I'm guessing that they'll also run in Photoshop Elements 12 as well. So in order to get started, there's a couple things. You need to make sure that your photo is renamed as a background layer. See over in my layers palette, I've renamed it to background layer. Okay, that's imperative that you do that step in this in Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. And the other important thing is to make sure in your color palette that black is set as your foreground and white as your background. One more tip before we get started, you need to make sure that you install the pattern set that's also included in your file. Otherwise you won't get the cool effects. You'll just get some gray or blue bubbly looking effect, and I don't think that's the look we're going for. There is a tutorial on the Scrap Girls blog that talks about installing patterns if you need that. Okay, so let's get started. Let's go up and play the first action, which is watercolor. Okay, so the threshold box is going to pop up, and you're just going to take your slider and move it to the right until you're happy with the look, how much detail you want. You might not want a lot. When you're happy, just go ahead and hit OK. And voila! So what we're left is with a background layer, which is this white, and then we've got our layer mask and then the pattern. Pretty cool, pretty easy. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and run the stencil action, which is the next action down. And this is going to apply the same watercolor pattern, but kind of a little bit more of a stencil-y looking, or maybe even more of a wet watercolor look. It just depends on what you think it looks like. Okay, so let's go ahead and push play. Threshold box is popping up again. Play with your slider and press OK. Okay, now so you can see, I'm going to go ahead and deselect that. It's a little more blurry, more of a stencil-y look on the edges. Now that is something that you can modify yourself on any of the actions. Okay, you just double click on the layer mask and you can play around. You can let more of the background show through by adjusting the density slider. Now this is only for Photoshop. I couldn't figure out how or if it was possible to play around with these settings in PSE 11. I'm guessing that it is. You can't. But if I'm wrong, email me. Okay, and then feathering will just make it a little bit more blurry. So basically you can just play around with the density in the feather excuse me, settings to get the look that you want. Okay? All right, so that is the first two actions in Photoshop. Let's head on over to Photoshop Elements 11. And I've got my original photo. And let's do the dreamy action. I love Photoshop 11 because Adobe has made it so easy to load actions now. All you have to do is go up here to this little arrow and say load actions. Oh, so much easier. I hated Photoshop Elements before for that very reason, just because actions are so hard to install and use. Not anymore. Hooray! Okay, so let's go ahead and push play. Let it work its magic. Okay, the threshold box pops up in Photoshop 11 just like it does in Photoshop. Okay. And voila! So again, we have a background layer, and then your mask layer, and your pattern layer. See, when I double click, nothing really happens. So I don't think we can get to those settings that like we can in Photoshop. Okay, but I'm really pleased with how easy it is to run the actions now in Photoshop 11, and I'm assuming 12 because I can't imagine they would make it so it didn't work. Okay, so let's head on back over to Photoshop. Okay, and I'm going to actually need to close this one and open it again. If you just want a painted look effect, you can just run the paint. This is more of a subtle look. All of the actions you will use the hue and saturation. I mean, not the hue and saturation, sorry, the threshold to make it more of a silhouette shape. Okay, so now with the sliders here, you can change the color and the saturation, make it darker. And voila! See, it's more of just a subtle painted, but you could make it darker if you wanted to. Okay, so that one's a fun one. Let's go back over to Photoshop Elements. Not going to save that one. Okay. Let's go ahead and do the one named Paper. Now this one I love because this allows you to use any of your digital papers or any, you might have some textures that you've saved into a file. Or even a photo, you know, of something, of trees or leaves or whatever. So go ahead and hit play. Okay, gonna slide our threshold over. Now it says hit stop and drag over your digital player on top of your photo layer. Okay, so I've got my paper in the bin. Going to make sure it's over that, and then just go ahead and hit play again. And there you go. So see, you can use any paper that you want, and this is in Photoshop Elements and Photoshop. You can just get all kinds of cool effects. Another tip too is you want to run your action. It's going to work best if you just run it on a photo and then take your photo over to your layout. And the bigger the photo, the more impact it has. You can run it on smaller photos if you want, but I think the bigger photos really make a great impact. I think I'll show you the text. There's a couple of text ones that are pretty cool. Okay, so let's just run the text, or words, I guess. And this is just letting you pick the color of your text. Okay, and so this one is a little bit lighter. It's more, I think the word's dark is just more dense. There's just more text in it. And then let's run the painted words. This one I think is one of my favorite ones. Okay, now it's going to pop up another box where you can choose the color of the text. And there you go. So that one's really fun. Okay, so you could select that layer and then take a brush. This is my snow dust brush, and create a whole different look if you wanted to, but then your layer is going to be compromised, I guess you could say. You could duplicate it. That's probably what I would do. And you can even change the color. So you can do some different effects. So that looks horrible, but it gives you the idea. So I think I've covered everything. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. And if you have any questions, make sure to email me.